All right, I want to take a few minutes just to go over the rendering process of this. Now, last time we were showing the Mari stuff where Mari kept crapping out on me. So this is what I ended up coming up with for my end-up texture, okay? So while I was inside Mari, I painted on the scuffs and scratches and dents and dings, okay? I didn't use any of the label that was there. I just literally painted in like where it's rusty. Once I had that in Mari, then I could export it out of Mari, bring it into Photoshop, and start this layering process to get my texture to look the way I want my texture to look. Meaning that I have some areas that are rust stained like this, and other areas that are, you can see the label pretty clear. Thinking. While Photoshop's still loading. There we go. Alright, so this is my Photoshop document that I have. So you can see, here's what I got out of Mari, is this. It just came in with this gray texture that has the metal on it. And then all of this is just rust, like all over the place kind of rust. And I use that inside here just to have just this layer of rust. I also put a layer mask on it just so I could isolate certain areas. I didn't want the rust to be like all over the place. I wanted to control it better. So by just adding a layer mask, I'm able to do that. Okay. Then I added a second layer, and the second layer just acts as another way to kind of add a different layer of rust, a different level of it. So here is just kind of like a dully rust, and then here is something that's a little bit more bright. And I made the one, and then this is the same one. So these are the exact same image. Okay. It's just one is basically showing all of this kind of dim. I set it to multiply. And then the other one is just set to normal, and it has a layer mask on it. That's the only difference. And then here's my layer with all of my label stuff on it. Okay? So I've adjusted these to make it look like it's kind of rusty and dingy and whatever else. So I saved this out as my color map. So then I would have a color map of this for the rust. Then I also went through and turned off all of these. Oops, not that. All of the text here, like this, and like that. And then I saved this out. Oops, I have one more extra thing on. Oh, there it is. There we go. I saved this out as a bump map because I wanted to bump. I didn't use the letters on there because then the letters are going to be bumped out, and that would look weird. Okay? Yes, ma'am.
Why didn't you use the labels in the bump map?
What was that?
Why didn't you use the labels in the bump map?
Because I didn't want it to seem like it was like crazy bumped out. I just wanted a little bit, and if you look close, you can see there's a tiny bit of a difference. Right there. Oops. So you can see there's a little bit of a difference right here, where that's a little bit different. So it will bump a little bit, but I didn't want it to be like boom. Okay? Wherever we have contrast, that's where the bump's going to happen the most. So if I had the label on there, it would really bump up a lot. All right? There we go. So I added these in there so that I would have these different colored ones, which is basically just this color overlay. Okay? So that's what I used for my color, and that's what I used for my bump for my rust. Now you have to think about all that stuff as you're creating these because that's what's going to help it kind of sell a bit better. Now some of these areas I didn't need to get in too close to. Like you don't need to be zoomed up this close and start painting in this stuff because you're just not going to ever see that, so why bother? So once I had my textures, I dropped them onto here. I made a brand new material. And this is my Rust Mila. And then I also use my bump map for also my glossy roughness. And what that does is it helps kind of make it a bit rougher in some of those darker areas. Okay? Or sorry, in the whiter areas of this, the specularity just kind of like blurs a little bit more. And in the darker areas, it's a little bit crisper. Then I also added the bump map. So there's my bump. Okay. And then I obviously have the color there. And then I showed last time how to do this and how to do the little turntable animation. Okay. Now I did put an environment in here. So I wanted to have maybe just a little bit of extra reflection, because that's one of the things that really helps kind of sell stuff, is giving it extra reflections in there. Because if we have reflectivity on but there's nothing to reflect into it, there's nothing to see, right? So it just basically becomes washed out. So remember back when we did our primers, we had those spheres and we had the lights reflecting into them. We had the backgrounds and stuff reflecting into those also. So what I did was, on my render settings here, under scene, I went to image-based lighting and hit create. And all this does is it makes this big sphere right there, that yellow sphere. It makes that sphere, and then what I can do is assign an HDR to it. Okay, so I went to SIBL, HDR. And this allows me to download HDR images for free. HDR images are basically, they went into an environment and they shot a series of photos facing this wall. Then they turned their camera and shot a series of photos. And they turned their camera and shot a series of photos. And they do it all the way around. And then they angle the camera up and do that all the way around. They angle the camera down and do that all the way around. Then they put all these images together into one image. So you probably have seen those things on Facebook where you take your camera and your phone, you can move it around and you can see the environment. That's essentially what it's creating, is this 3D environment, but it's creating it with so much depth information that it actually records like light information and everything else, which is really neat. So all of these things here are different environments. So I kind of found one that seemed appropriate. Again, this is just being used for reflection information. So it's kind of dark. It's got some contrasty things here. So I thought this was kind of neat. It's really bright right there. So I found that one, I don't know, somewhere down there, okay? When you get these, you just click on it and you save it. I'll just save this to the desktop. And once it's done downloading, holy cow, you're gonna take forever. You just right click and unzip it. There will be about 6 files in there. You just need to grab the one that's the biggest HDR, okay? And that's what I've used here. This Tokyo 3K HDR. It's a 15 megabyte file. And basically what's going to happen is it's going to be used as a secondary bit of reflection that bounces in. Now in order for it to not render, I went under render stats and turned off primary visibility. If you leave this on, then when you render this, you'll have this background here, which is kind of like a buzzkill. You don't want that, so just turn that off. Okay. All right, you may have noticed I duplicated my can. So I have this can here, which is like my bent can. But I also have a clean can, which is perfectly nice and smooth like the original one I modeled. The denting of this one helps add to the realism, or the look of it being rusty and dingy and kind of old looking, okay? And like I showed before, I just went in here, grabbed some points, and just moved them around. That's all I did. Okay, that's all you really need to do, is just kind of dingy it up a little bit. Now once I had these, I have my clean can, I have my dirty can, I have my turntable stuff set up, I have my lights in my scene, I have my 3D, or my spherical reflection thing. Then it's time to actually go through and render this thing out. So we set up an animation, I set up an animation that's 150 frames of this thing spinning around. Okay, so it goes here, all the way around. Now, if I want to render this out, I have to render basically my clean one, render it all the way through, then reboot Maya or whatever, turn my dirty one back on, start at frame 1 and render that one out. So that's kind of a hassle to do, especially if you want to be able to just set it up to render and then leave it alone and let it do its thing. So I'm going to show you how to use render layers. If you've used these before in previous years, they've actually changed it in 2016 extension 2. Okay, so under the rendering editor's render setup, there's this window here. And what this is I can create different layers that will render. So basically, imagine that you had, you want to render one scene, and then you want to render another scene, that kind of thing, or you want to render a character here and a character there in the background all separate. You can do that with render layers. So I'm going to click the little eyeball, and you can see how I can switch between my clean camera, or my clean can, and my rusty can. Okay, so just very easily just switching between those. So I'm going to go through and delete these, so they're gone. And what I'm going to do is create those again, okay? So let me open my outliner. That open. Let me bring this in here, okay? So what I need to do is I'm just going to create a new render layer. So you hover your mouse over it, that's create render layer. This one is import a render layer template. I don't have a template, I need to make a new one, okay? So this is going to be Rusty Can's layer. So what I want to do is I want to put everything in here that I want to render when I render the rusty can. So everything I would render with the rusty can should be on this layer. So I'm going to right click and make a collection, and then I can call this rusty can collection. And all I have to do is, you see where it says drag nodes using the outliner, I just drag stuff into that, or I can select it and hit add. Okay, so here's the easiest way to do that, is just use your outliner. I know that this is not it, okay? This is nothing, just ignore that. Can number 2, this is my clean can, so I definitely wouldn't want to select that and add it. Can number 3 is a dirty can, but it's not the dirtiest one, so I don't want that. Cylinder 1 is that. These groups, perspective, group 6, group 4, this, and this, that's all the stuff I want, okay? Oops. So I'm going to grab all those items and say add. Okay, so now all these items are inside here. If I want to see what's on there, I click the little eyeball, and now I can see what's on there. I can see my ground is missing, that little disc, so I need to add that back in there. How'd that happen? Oops, cylinder, there it is. So I'm going to click the cylinder, hit add, and now that guy's back in there. Okay, so when this renders, what's going to happen is it's going to go through and it's going to render out just the stuff that's on there. I could have an entire field of people, and as long as only one person is on that layer, only one person will render. So now I'm going to make a new layer, and this one will be called my clean can. And I'll make a clean can collection. And I'll do the exact same thing. I'll go through and grab number 2, this, that. I'll add those items in. I'll click the eyeball so I can see it. That's my clean can, that's there. Oops. All my lights are inside here, my background is inside here. If you forget anything, it won't render it. So if I forget my lights, it won't render the lights. If I forget my platform, it won't render it. If I forget this, it won't render it, okay? Now the point of the collections, this is one of the nice things about 2016's Extension 2's update, is that you could automatically create stuff. So in this collection here, I've manually grabbed items and put that in the collection. But let's say I go and I add 7 more lights. I have to go back into each one of these and add 7 more lights into each one of those. Well, what I can do is I can say create a new, oops, click on the right thing, create a new collection. I'll say lights. And if I right click and go to filters, you see there's a filter that says lights. So what that means is any lights that are inside my scene, it'll automatically add into that collection. So if I add a new light, it automatically adds it into this collection, which is pretty sweet. So just to test it out, oops, my screen is not big enough. Let's go to a point light. Here's the point light right here. I'm going to see this render layer, so I click on that, and you'll see that the point light does not show up. Why doesn't the point light show up? Oh, I think I have to actually type in lights. Right. There it is. I did star, light, star. There we go. And then it'll add all the lights in the scene. Okay, so then I could take this and make a new one for this one. So create a collection here, lights. I'll just type this in, star, light, star. And so now on this one, there it goes. Okay, so now whatever lights I add to my scene, I can pop in there. The same thing with my pieces of geometry. If I had 7 pieces of geometry and I name them a certain thing, I can make sure they're always populated inside of these specific collections. I can also disable that. So I believe this one disables it. Yep. So now my lights are not in the scene. So you see how I clicked that off and now all my lights went away because they're no longer being included in there. Okay. So very cool stuff. Now I need to make sure that these little render things are on. Those make sure that those layers will render. I need to make sure that these ones are off. And then I need to go through my render settings. Okay. So for the name, I right click and I say changes to layer name. And what that means is whatever I've labeled this as, rusty can, clean can, that's what it's going to be labeled. Okay, so already it's going to help me organize my stuff because I have those things labeled the correct way. OpenEXR, zips, name.number.extension, start frame 1, end frame 150, which camera, turntable camera, that's good. Quality, set to 2. There is a Mila quality, so I set that up to 2 also. My scene, that should be fine, that should be fine. I don't need this to emit an environment light. I don't know why that was clicked. All right, that should be cool. Okay, so now when I go into my rendering mode, oh, it's down there. I got scared. Now when I go into my rendering mode and I go to batch render, I make sure this is set to at least 16 because I think we have 16 processors. How many do we figure? 12. Right. We have 12 on here. Then we hit batch render. What it's going to do is it goes to my first render layer and it's going to render all 150 frames. Okay. When that's done, it's going to go to my other render layer and render all 150 frames. So if you're going away for the night or the weekend or the week, you can set this up and just let it go. And by the time you're done, all your stuff will be re-rendered out. Okay. So it's immensely helpful when you're doing that kind of stuff. Now the other thing that we may want to do is I've also included in mine a depth pass and an ambient occlusion pass. Those are always good things to include in every render that you do. The depth pass is going to give us the depth from the camera, like I showed going into Nuke and tweaking all that stuff. And then the ambient occlusion pass is going to give us the black and white, where our objects are close to each other. So all of these little areas like here, where our lid is really close to this, and where we're really close right here, it'll give us extra detail there to help us kind of lock it into this surface so that it feels a little bit more in touch with it. Feels a little bit more crisp. Okay, so we typically want to render those out as well. So you can see it's going through and rendering out all of my stuff. Here's RS Rusty Can 1. Same thing, it's still going, 100%. Okay, now these ones are going to take longer than probably most of the stuff you've done before. We're dealing with larger textures, not so much a larger scene, but pretty much a larger texture, larger lighting. Oops, that's not the right folder. So if I look at my images here, just so you can see it, let me cancel this because it's re-rendering all my stuff. Here are 2 of my files. So right here, you can see the timestamp. So 4:48 and then 5:13 is the next one. So it's taking roughly 26 minutes, 25 minutes to render out a single frame. Okay. So if you figure we got 150 frames times 2 cameras, that's a long time to render. All right. So are going to fit into this. So these things where we modeled stuff, we've laid out the UVs, we brought into Mari to texture it, we brought the textures back into Photoshop and textured stuff, and then we brought it back into Maya to render it out. That's going to be the same process for the next one. We're just doing, instead of one object, we're doing that to several objects in our scene, okay? If you have a wall, you want to add a piece of graffiti, you want to do whatever to it, we may have to take it into Photoshop, we may have to take it into Mari, we have to take it wherever. If we have a fire hydrant, we want to do the same thing. If we have a window, if we have a whatever. We need to be able to do this workflow because it's continuous, okay? Now we'll also be playing with gaming stuff, so being able to take our stuff that we've built and actually bring it into an environment and be able to spin around and move and walk through our environment is one of our goals for the next assignment, okay? But we need to make sure we understand all of this stuff so that when we get to that, we're ready for it. Okie dokie.